It takes a while to get through these plagues of Egypt and the children of Israel with their exodus out of Egypt as having been slaves for generations. It takes a while to get through these stories, but I hope you can sense that the scriptures are building up to a climax. They're building up to the crescendo. There's going to be, God's doing an incredibly powerful thing here in the eyes of the Gentile nations that surround Egypt and Egypt itself. And he's thumbing his nose at the Egyptian gods, and he's making a point to Pharaoh that you're no God, and these are my people. These are my children, my firstborn. Now we're at Exodus chapter 9, and we're going to just get right into it. Verse 1. So this is basically plague number 5 begins. Then Yehovah, and I love it. There it is, all capitals, Lord. So we're going to restore the name with Papa John's help. Then Yehovah, that's what it said in Hebrew originally, said unto Moses. If I pronounced Moses in Hebrew, it'd be Moshe. But I won't do that too often. I'll try to stay focused here. And Yehovah said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, and tell him, Thus saith Yehovah, Elohim of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. And then our LDS scholar, Jared Halverson, says, If you don't, then a deadly plague will fall upon all your animals. Everything else up to this point has kind of been a nuisance or a nuance, or both of those, right? Well, now it's going to be an actual loss, a major economic loss. Your animals will die. And verse 2, For if thou refuse to let them go and wilt hold them still, behold, the hand of Yehovah. In fact, Nehemiah Gordon puts it this way. In verse 3, in the Hebrew, Exodus 9, verse 3, I'm going to toss this softball out to Keith, our Methodist minister. Keith, it says there in the Hebrew, Behold the hand of Yehovah. And then in Hebrew, it continues by saying, Behold the hand of Yehovah, Hoya Bimik Naha Hoya. Literally, it means it will be or it will happen. The hand of Yehovah will happen on your cattle that are in the field. So is there a significance to that word, he asked. When you read that word in Hebrew, it's like a reminder of he who is, he who was, and he shall be, which if you remember that episode, when he describes not that his name is I am that I am, but he goes in and talks about his identity and his name, the divine name, and how it means he who was, he who is, he who was, he who shall be. And there's a reference to that. It's alluded to in the Hebrew when it says the hand of Yehovah, Hayo, Haya. Is that what it says? He asked. There is this present tense word, to be, in the feminine for Hoya, and it rhymes with the name Yehovah. So that's the Hebrew poetry. That's what Nehemiah is pointing out here. He continues, and I don't think that's an accident because this is an unusual word to have used here. It could have used lots of other words. It could have used the word that we have in the NIV, the nearly inspired version, right? To bring lehave or tavi. It could have said mehviah or something like that. But no, it used the word hoya because it rhymes with Yehovah, which really is an unusual word for this context. I think it's creating this rhyming with God's name. Then Jono Vandor from Australia says, compare that to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 3. The word of Yehovah came expressly to Ezekiel, the priest. And then Nehemiah Gordon, our Hebrew scholar, says, well, what it says in Hebrew, the first four words are, I'm going to use the traditional Messianic pronunciation, even though I'm a Karaite Jew. And if you don't know what a Karaite Jew is, it's another sect of Judaism which Nehemiah has joined himself to. He was raised as an Orthodox Jew, but he now follows the Karaite sect in Judaism, and they only accept the first 5 books of the Old Testament, which Exodus is part of, and basically that's the Torah itself, and everything else is subject to the Torah, the first 5 books, which in Christianity we would just call the law, God's law. So he says, I'm a Karaite, I'm not Messianic, but it says, Hayo Haya Devar Yahweh. Now, that's in the NIV version, but he's explained to us that Yahweh is a Christian fiction. It's an invention of Christianity, and it wouldn't rhyme. So let me just continue. I'll read what he says, and I'll stop interrupting myself. Which literally means there surely was the word of Yahweh. And it says to Ezekiel, the son of Buzi, the priest, etc. But if you read it in the way it's preserved in the earliest, most vocalized Hebrew manuscripts, it's Hayo Haya Devar Yehovah. Hayo Haya Devar Yehovah. Hacha. Hacha. And that rhymes. And the reason that's significant is it's totally unnecessary to have said Hayo Haya. Haya. It would have normally said Vahyahi, and it came to pass, the word of Yehovah to Ezekiel. So again, Papa John is terrible at pronunciating anything in Hebrew. I'm doing my best. I hope you can appreciate our Hebrew scholars' insights, even with my somewhat incompetent tongue. He then wraps this up by saying, why did it say here, Hayo Haya Devar Yehovah? There's clearly something poetic being created here, some poetic style that's being expressed. And this poetic style is very obvious to me reading it in Hebrew, but we're dealing here with a rhyme of the Creator's name. And that's a beautiful poetry in Hebrew. And clearly we're dealing with something that was built on a poetry that matches the name of Jehovah. It doesn't work with Yahweh or Yahuwah and other forms of supposedly God's divine name. And the interesting thing about our verse in Exodus 9:3 here, remember I said it was an unusual word to use here. Not only is it unusual here, the present tense for the form of the verb to be is actually one of the only 3 times in the entire Bible that it appears in the feminine. And the other 2 are hove in the masculine, but this is the only time it appears in the feminine. And of course, in Hebrew, it's feminine because the word hand in Hebrew is a feminine noun. And so it gets a feminine verb. But Hanei Yad Yehovah Yehoah Hayoy Hayeh, that is rhyming. That is poetry. And it doesn't work with the Yahweh, but it does work with Jehovah. Anyway, I terribly disrespected Nehemiah's scholarly knowledge, but I hope you take time to study that more yourself, and you can read this yourself and do your best transliterations. But I think that has value from the Hebrew perspective for all of us in Christianity who are totally ignorant and perhaps are getting the name of God wrong. I know for most of my life, I didn't even know there was a debate. I was very satisfied to just read the Lord and not realize that if it's all capitals, it actually originally was his divine name. Verse 4, and Yehovah shall sever. And that's in the King James, but Jono Vandor in his Bible says, and Yehovah will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So again, Nehemiah Gordon steps in to rescue us all and help us understand. So it says in Hebrew, Vehef la Yehovah Ben Mikva Mitzrayim. And that's the word that actually means to separate, to make a distinction. There's the same word that we had in Exodus 8:18 when he said, "But on this day I will set apart the region of Goshen where my people dwell." So when King James in verse 4 says sever, no, this is setting apart between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt. So there's going to be a setting apart, a separation between Egypt's cattle and the children of Israel's cattle. Verse 5, and Yehovah appointed a set time, saying, tomorrow Yehovah shall do this thing in the land. We're going to see that differentiation. Wow. Clearly, there shall nothing die of all that is the children of Israel's. And Yehovah appointed to set the time, saying, tomorrow Yehovah shall do this thing in the land. So he's giving Pharaoh a warning so that he can avoid these consequences if he chooses. Completely protected, though, for Israel, but no protection for Egypt. And sure enough, verse 6, and Yehovah did that thing on the morrow, and all the cattle of Egypt died. But of the cattle of the children of Israel, died not one. Now, our LDS scholar says, now, usually the difference isn't that stark. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. The righteous can suffer and the wicked can prosper, just like the reverse can be true, like it is here. But there are times, I need to make this crystal clear, especially for you hard-hearted hearts, those with hard hearts and blind eyes. The Israelites aren't suffering the way you're suffering because they're not going against me in the way that you're going against me. All of this could have been avoided. Now your animals are all dead. It's one thing for frogs to come and then die, or lice to come and then disappear, or flies to swarm and then evaporate into the air, or so it seems. No harm, no foul. No wonder you're able to sink back into your sins because the consequences were not permanent. They weren't drastic enough. Well, let's change that. And now your animals are gone and there's no bringing them back. And verse 7, and Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not one of the cattle of the Israelites dead. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. Which Brother Halverson says that suggests that Pharaoh must have heard the reports. He's seen dead animals all around him in his territory, but wait a minute, seriously? No dead animals in Goshen? If those reports are true, whoa, yeah. This God of Israel is really separating the wheat from the tares. Go find out for sure. So he sends his servants and they come back with that report. It's accurate. The cattle are alive and well in Goshen. Yet that makes Pharaoh still angrier. The truth is becoming more and more obvious, but he will not budge. So another plague is about to come. Verse 8, and Jehovah said unto Moses and unto Aaron, and Brother Halverson says, now pay attention here. This is the first time we've seen Aaron for quite a while, not since the plague of lice. It seems like God is weaning Moses off of his crutch, Aaron. He doesn't need the rod quite so much either. He doesn't need his spokesman quite so much. Well, we'll see Aaron kind of come and go between some of these plagues, which I think is true to form as well. There are days when we feel more confident. I can do this on my own, and other times when we fall back into our sense of inadequacy and we're looking around for help. Well, Aaron's back for this one, and the Lord tells them both, take to you handfuls of ashes of the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. So make sure he sees this. And it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains. Now we're going to have to figure out what that word means. But Brother Halverson continues, in other words, these are festering boils or blisters. They're open sores. This is getting pretty nasty, pretty painful, and it's going to be. It's going to be upon man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. Now you see how we're getting closer and closer. First, it was just temporal problems, but as time passes, we can dig around some. We can wait for others to go away. We can pretend to repent and then go back to our sinful ways once time has passed. Now we've got some permanent damage. Our cattle are dead, but it's still at a distance, I guess, I've lost some economics, but there's not anything personal I'm suffering. But now, in a way, it's personal and it's physical. They are feeling the pain of the sins that they will not get rid of. And you can get a sense of Brother Halverson's applying, helping us think about our lives instead of just reading a story about the children of Israel. How can we apply these stories to ourselves? Verse 10. And they took ashes of the furnace and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it upon or up towards heaven, and it became a boil, breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. That just sounds painful, whatever they're suffering from. Now, Nehemiah, again, our Hebrew scholar, he says the word here is shechin, which is the same exact word that appears in the story of Job. We're probably dealing here with something that might be something like smallpox. And sometimes they might translate this as hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids, oh my goodness. I hope not, right? Verse 11. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. Then Halverson adds, but still Pharaoh holds on. He holds on to his hardened heart. It's interesting to watch the evolution of the magicians and see that they're changing. They start to plead with Pharaoh, please change. We'll see them do that exactly soon, he says. So it's just interesting to realize that Pharaoh has the hardest heart of all compared to even his magicians. So let's continue now with verse 12. In verse 12 it says, Vayihazek. Thank you, Nehemiah. So he's talking about Pharaoh's hardened heart. And you notice that Joseph Smith in the green ink, again, changes it from Yehovah or the Lord hardening the heart of Pharaoh. No, Pharaoh hardened his heart. So, Vayechanzek. And he strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, literally. So again, according to the Hebrew, unlike the Joseph Smith translation, it says exactly what it says, that God hardened his heart. But I understand why Joseph Smith wants to soften that to respect agency. But that's not what it says in the Hebrew. And that's why we inherit that in the King James Version. Now, Nehemiah continues, and what that means, he strengthened his heart, is these things are literally going to happen to you. And the Hebrew expression is your heart will melt. You're going to get all weak in the knees and like, oh man, I can't deal with this. And instead, God strengthened Pharaoh's heart. And Pharaoh was, I'm just not going to listen to this. Again, I really like that to push the boundaries of Papa John's understanding, to consider the possibilities that it's more than just a doctrinal issue of protecting our free will and our agency, which God does respect, but there's actually a Hebrew saying that is being repeated in these scriptures that is lost in translation into the English. Now, Papa John, let's just continue. Verse 13, and Yehovah said unto Moses, rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say unto him, thus saith Yehovah, Elohim of the Hebrews, let my people go, they, that they may serve me. It's starting to sound like a broken record, right? Verse 14, for I will at this time send all my plagues upon thine heart. Jared Halverson says, you can't shield yourself from these things forever. It's going to hit closer and closer to home. I want to get this into thine heart, since that's the source of the problem. Can I soften it, or will I have to break it? This plague will come upon thine heart, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, that thou mayest know that there is none like me in all the earth. The absolute uniqueness of the God of Israel, doing things that not even the entire pantheon of the Egyptian gods can accomplish. Verse 15, for now I will stretch out my hand, that I may smite thee and thy people with pestilence, and thou shalt be cut off from the earth. How's that for irreversible consequences? And the verse continues, and in very deed, for this cause have I raised thee up. And then Halverson explains, Other translations say allowed you to remain or to let you live. That's closer to to the original translation. God hasn't raised him up to be this obstinate. God didn't harden Pharaoh's heart. He's just honoring Pharaoh's agency and let him live and allowed him to remain. And here's why: to show in thee my power, that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. Your opposition is only giving me more opportunity to prove my power. Moses is the positive witness for God's glory. Pharaoh is the negative witness for God's glory. But they're both witnessing to the same thing: a God of glory unlike anyone has ever seen before. Now, Papa John just wants to add this regarding Yahovah's name being declared throughout the earth, despite the conspiracy of silence and the Pharisaic traditions of not pronouncing the name of God, for it becoming, in their minds, too holy to pronounce, and the other such Gentile traditions which frown upon the actual verbal use of the name of God. And that's inconsistent with this verse, which says that my name may be declared throughout the earth. So God wants his name to be declared, and he wants every nation to know him by name. So it's just interesting. I love the Hebrew insights. I love our LDS scholars' insights about agency. But this verse makes it very clear, and this is, again, part of the reason why Papa John is so willing and eager to restore the name whenever I see the all capital letters of Lord. Jared Halverson continues with verse 17. As yet exaltest thyself against my people, that thou wilt not let them go. So still feeling invincible, Pharaoh, that Egyptians are superior to Israelites, and that you and your gods are more powerful than the God of Israel? Well, we can change that, and that's about to happen, as you can see. Now, Keith Johnson, he's quoting, and he calls it the nearly inspired version from the NIV. Again, he does that. It's actually his favorite Bible, but he just uses that NIV instead of I think it's the New International Version is what NIV actually stands for. He says, I will send the worst hailstorm. And then Keith Johnson says, I'm reading out of the nearly inspired version, the NIV, verse 18. Therefore, at this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded until now. It's a pretty bad hailstorm, he says. Now, Jono from Australia says, that's some serious stuff. It takes me back to around 2010. We had a hailstorm here in Sydney that was spectacular. I've never seen anything like it since. The hail balls were the size of cricket balls, maybe the size of like a baseball in America, if you like. They were that size, and it went through 10 roofs, corrugated iron roofs. It tore through it. It absolutely destroyed cars. It crushed cars, and there was carnage everywhere. It was just one of the most spectacular things. And I imagine perhaps that these hailstorms and hailstones even destroyed trees. There was carnage all over the place. So he's identifying with what Egypt might have gone through. Now our LDS scholar repeats that verse about the worst storm since the foundation of Egypt. And then Jared Halverson says, these will be consequences beyond anything you've ever seen before. We're going from BB guns to bazookas because nothing small is making a dent in that hardened heart. You will see hell descend from heaven. We're now dealing with atmospheric kind of elements and natural disasters with no natural explanations. To this point, maybe you're still holding on to your humanistic oh my gosh, these words, epistemology, epistemology, there you go. You're still trying to chalk this all up to rational consequences and pollution in the river, and the fish die and the frogs leap out and then they die and breed lice, and then flies that spread disease to the cattle and they die. Quit reminding me that it didn't happen in Goshen. That's what Pharaoh's attitude is. And then and it spread to us. So of course we're going to break out in blisters and sores, but we'll do better. This will pass, Pharaoh's hoping. Okay, fine. What's going to cause the hell? What's going to bring that on? When will you admit that there is a God of Israel? Halverson is, again, he's very good at driving the point home. Verse 19, send therefore now, gather thy cattle and all that thou hast in the field, for upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field and shall not be brought home, the hell shall come down upon them, and they shall die. Now back with the cattle that died from the plague number 5. Remember, they all died in Egypt, but none of them died in Israel, in Goshen. Well, I guess there's still cattle in the land. I would imagine he's taking cattle from the Israelites to repopulate the Egyptian herds, because here, when Moses tells him there's going to be another way to distinguish, because the hell will fall and destroy anything in its path, including any animals that remain outside. So send forth this report and gather the cattle in. Now, what I love about this, Brother Halverson says, is it's another chance for the people to self-select. How exposed to the wrath of God will I be versus how sheltered do I decide to become by coming underneath his covering? Oh, I love the root word of atonement. Kafar in Hebrew. It means covering. So remember, to cover is to atone. So Brother Halverson's making that point. So back to his words, and Papa John will stop interrupting. So if I take these cattle indoors and they're covered, then they'll be preserved. The choice is for the people now, not just for Pharaoh. And then he adds, I'm really curious if popular opinion is beginning to shift towards Israelites and their God, in favor of their God. Your people are suffering with all the consequences of these plagues of Egypt. Let's get the word out and see how they respond to it. Will they bring their cattle in? If they do, then guess what? Pharaoh, they believe me more than you, and they fear the God of Israel in ways that you should follow suit in. So God is actually giving the population of the Egyptians a chance to outwardly act in a way that shows they trust in him, or they believe the threats of the God of Israel, versus the pretend God, their ruler, their king, Pharaoh himself. Verse 20, and he that feared the word of Yehovah among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. They're bringing their cattle into their houses. That's amazing. Now, our Methodist minister adds, I see something significant in the plague of hell. What I see is where it's the first time God says there are some Egyptian officials who actually say, we fear the word of Yehovah, and the Exodus begins with some Egyptians that sneak in and join the Hebrews. So he's leading to the point where we're getting ahead of ourselves. But remember, I think in a few episodes ago, Papa John talked about a mixed multitude leaves with Egypt, not just the slaves, not just the children of Israel, but some of these Hebrews actually join the Exodus and leave Egypt with the children of Israel. Now, Keith Johnson, he finishes his comment by saying, listen, we're going out with these people. You know what? Enough is enough. We heard the word of Yehovah, and what is significant about this is that Yehovah says, I've done all these things. Now I'm giving you a chance. If you listen to my word, I'll bring some deliverance to you too. And they took part in that separation too. They heard the word and they responded. And I understand why our Methodist minister gets excited about that mixed multitude, because we are all adopted in our day, and we can join into that mixed multitude known as the children of Israel, the house of Israel. Now, a Hebrew scholar, he adds to this. He says, that's part of the mixed multitude. What it says in Hebrew is actually a verb. The verb is ha'etz. And ha'etz means bring it to an oz, a migdal oz, a migdal oz. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, the name of Jehovah is a migdal oz, which literally means a strong tower. Oh, I love this verse. Papa John, I love this verse. Yehovah's name is my strong tower. But let me get back to Nehemiah. And therefore, it's a place of shelter. The name of Jehovah is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and is safe. Wow, that's powerful. He continues, and here it's saying, and now send ha'etz, bring into a shelter, bring it into the place of Oz, your livestock that are in the field, etc. It's coming into a place of Oz, to come into the strong tower of Jehovah's name, and you won't have to worry about that hell once they're inside. Wow. Now, Jono Vandor quotes that scripture, Proverbs 18:10, the name of Jehovah is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe. That is brilliant. And that is a Torah pearl if there ever was one. And I agree. Now, Papa John has a short footnote here. I still remember the first time I came across that verse of Proverbs 18:10. It jumped off the page as I was still so filled with the indwelling of God's, the Father's Spirit. This verse made so much sense to me for the first time, and I found that verse without anyone like Nehemiah explaining the significance to me. As you can tell, Papa John loves the divine name, and I'm actually happy that it was hidden from the world. Why would I say that? So that the process of discovery, it makes it so much more sweet. I'm grateful for that process that I went through to finally trust the scriptures and how they were originally written, as close as I've ever been able to get back to the original history, language, and context. If I ever had known about this all my life, I may have been less impressed by it, so to speak. It's kind of strange how that works. But here in this verse, it seems that the everyday average Egyptians are beginning to believe in the God of the Hebrews faster than Pharaoh is. This also explains how Joseph, who was sold into Egypt, and his family, totaling only 66 people, grew to millions by the time of the Exodus that we're reading about here. This mixed multitude left Egypt together, but after they crossed the Red Sea, they were all considered Hebrews. Just like Father Abraham, a Gentile, became the first Hebrew when he crossed over the river, the Euphrates River, leaving his homeland. And if you didn't know that, Abraham was a Gentile like any of us. He wasn't part of God's chosen, let's say it that way, but he came to know the true and living God. And when he crossed the Euphrates River, leaving his land behind him, that was how he became the first Hebrew. And so this mixed multitude of partly the children of Israel, the slaves being freed, and then the Egyptians who want to join and leave in the Exodus, when they go through the Red Sea, after that, they're no longer a mixed multitude. They're all considered Israel and Hebrews, just like Father Abraham. I hope that makes sense to you. Verse 21, and he that regarded not the word of Yahweh left his servants and his cattle in the field. So are you willing to risk everything, Brother Halverson says? Pharaoh, are you willing to risk your people? Let's make a friendly or not so friendly, in this case, wager about whether or not there'll be hell and that you'll be held on tomorrow. Because if your people begin bringing in their animals, you'll know that they are coming to know the God of Israel, even if you refuse to. God does provide amazing ways to help us distinguish in ourselves and in others who believes and who has a heart that's hardening, who has a hardened heart. Verse 22, and Jehovah said unto Moses, stretch forth thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hell in all the land of Egypt, upon man and upon beast, and upon every herb of the field throughout the land of Egypt. Wow. And verse 23, and Moses stretched forth his rod towards heaven, and Jehovah sent thunder and hail. Brother Halverson says it's happening already. Then back to the verse. The fire ran along the ground, and Jehovah rained hail upon the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire mingled with hail very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And Halverson says, oh, wait a minute, fire with the hell? Yikes. I don't even know how that's to envision that. But that part hadn't been told to them. I wonder if Pharaoh is like, well, wait, you talked about hell, but you didn't mention the fire. Well, Pharaoh, would that have made a difference? Because I've been clearly specifying all the consequences of sin, and none of it seems to make a difference. I think sometimes you need to be reminded. I think we need to be reminded that there will be consequences that that could mean consequences that we can't even imagine. If you know that if you know that that's the result, I bet there are ways you can circumvent them, thinking I can get around the consequences somehow. No, not all of them. Some perhaps, but there will always be consequences, and some of them unforeseen and unimaginable. Papa John adds an insight here. As much as Papa John delights in the divine name of God the Father, well, Papa John also lives a life, unfortunately, with many regrets. And I think some of you might understand and have similar feelings. The unknown consequences of sin are many and long lasting. And Papa John knows that from a personal perspective. And then I continue with my footnote here. If I could, I would go back in time and avoid those actions that caused such regrets. But that is not possible, which makes the relief I feel for my repentant heart and newfound affections for God and His ways, combined with the knowledge of the mystery of God's holy divine personal name, well, the relief I feel is so much more powerful, meaningful, and precious. So I rejoice in my redemption and in my Redeemer and in His holy name. His holy name be praised. I have never regretted my personal exodus from Egypt with its culture of sin, usury, and servitude. Yes, I overcame my natural man tendencies towards sin, but thankfully, I was never held captive to the slavery of addiction that's so common in our day. So may my children and my children's children, extended family and friends that I've met along the way, may we all be so blessed. And that's part of my constant prayer, if that makes sense. Back to verse 25. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail smote every herb of the field, and brake every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. Brother Halverson adds, in some ways, you could describe it as that's what repentance brings you. That's what hearkening to living prophets can offer you. We can see chaos all around us, but we will be in the eye of the storm, the way that it's described in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 63, verse 54, speaking of the last days. It says, until that hour there will be foolish virgins among the wise. We could say wheat among the tares. It's just kind of all mixed and mingled. But what happens at the end? At that hour cometh an entire separation of the righteous and the wicked. Someday you'll be able to tell. At harvest time is when the wheat and the tares fully distinguish who's a wheat and who's a tare. But until then, it's hard to tell. And so it is in our life, in our day. Verse 27, and Pharaoh sent and calls for Moses and Aaron and said unto them, I have sinned this time. This is the first time he ever said that, Brother Halverson says. Yehovah of Israel is righteous. And look, Pharaoh pronounced his name again. Why? How do I know that? Because it's all capital, Lord. Yehovah of Israel is righteous. That's the first time he said that, Brother Halverson says. He's unaware of the name with the all capitals. In his mind, the Lord of Israel is righteous. And that's the first time he said that. And you know what? It's okay to go through life with that understanding. But if you're like Papa John, man, there's so many other details you miss without that key of knowledge. Brother Halverson continues, and I and my people are wicked. This is Brother Halverson reading the verse, quoting Pharaoh, which continues. The verse says, entreat Yehovah, for it is enough that there be no more mighty thunderings in hell, and I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer. Brother Halverson says, this is such a turning point. This is plague number 7. 7 is the number for totality, completeness, and perfection. 7 days of creation. This is enough. He says, I get it. I have sinned. I am wicked. You are righteous. You're right. I'm wrong. I will surrender. Here's my white flag. Leave, just leave. I'll let the people go. But what has it taken? Egypt is no more, basically. Only Goshen remains. Just that eye of the storm. Leave. I surrender. But did he really? Keep your eyes open. Verse 29. And Moses says unto him, as soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread abroad my hands unto Yehovah. So Brother Helverson helps us understand what he's expressing here. So much more specific, a moment that's going to make Moses' role that much more obvious. Not tomorrow sometime. I'm going to walk out of the city. As soon as I'm on my way out, I'll stretch my hands and you'll see. You will know. And the verse continues, and the thunder shall cease, neither shall there be any more hail, that thou mayest know that the earth is Jehovah's. But as for thee and thy servants, I know that ye will not yet fear Jehovah Elohim. So that was Moses speaking. For a minute, I thought it was Pharaoh. It's interesting, Brother Halverson says, that Moses knew Pharaoh's heart well enough to know that this wasn't actually the end of it all. It would not be a perfect number seven. It would go all the way to a complete number 10. But I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. And isn't it amazing? Now Halverson's going to help us apply the scripture to ourselves. It's amazing how merciful the Lord is with us, even when he knows that this probably isn't the last time after all. Even though we said it is, and we finally acknowledge our sin, we finally repented, we recognize God's righteousness and our wickedness, we say it's enough, and he will honor that. He will honor our best intentions, even when time will prove otherwise. Even knowing our worst selves, God will give us the benefit of that doubt. I hope we can do that for others, Brother Halverson says. He's always thinking of more than just himself. Brother Halverson is a great man of God who not only connects with God vertically, but reaches horizontally in the sign of the cross to serve those around him. Verse 31, and the flax and the barley were smitten because the barley was aviv. And this word aviv is going to become very important soon, but not so much in this chapter. Papa John and Nehemiah Gordon will go into the aviv. And the flax was gavol. These are Hebrew agricultural terms, Nehemiah says. This is important because later in Deuteronomy 16, it gives a commandment to observe and keep the month of the Aviv. If you don't know ancient biblical Hebrew, you don't know what that means. Even the Hebrews and the Orthodox Jews of our day have lost the true meaning of this word Aviv. That's what he's going to point out in brief here. Some people think that Aviv is the name of the month. It turns out that Aviv is actually this agricultural term that describes the barley as it's beginning to enter into that month. This is one of our key verses for reconstructing the meaning of that ancient Hebrew word, Aviv, which is important even for Hebrew speakers because in modern Hebrew, Aviv has taken on a new meaning, which is it means spring to the modern Hebrew language. You can actually look in the dictionary that chronicles the history of the Hebrew language, and you can see that a shift took place around the 14th century. Prior to that, every Jewish or Hebrew source always used the word Aviv in the sense of this agricultural stage of the ripening of the barley. Then around the 14th century, when there were Jews in Europe, because Israel doesn't actually have a spring to speak of, but when they were in Europe and they're dealing with spring in northern Europe, they had to come up with a word for it, and they adopted this word. That's important because the biblical calendar is basically the beginning of the year. The beginning of the solar cycle is governed by the ripening of the barley, which ripens when the earth reaches a certain stage in its pattern of going around the sun. So that's significant for the biblical calendar. And Nehemiah says, I think it's interesting. As we get to chapter 12, we will connect chapter 12 back to this verse. Also, it becomes incredibly important because it's giving the time frame context. So later on in Exodus chapter 23 and 34, it's going to tell us to keep the Passover in the time of the Aviv, because it's the time that they went out of Egypt, and that is the time when the barley was Aviv. So there's a lot of confusion about the month of Nisan, the first month, and the month of the Aviv is actually not the name of the month. It's a stage of the barley ripening, which could happen in the 12th month, or if it hasn't reached the stage of Aviv, just giving a teaser here, sometimes the Hebrew calendar adds a 13th month. And that will blow the socks off of most anybody. It's really cool stuff. Verse 32, but the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. Papa John, I'm going to add insights here and everything I kind of described here about the month of the Aviv and such. So much of what we're talking about here is totally lost to the Christian mind. And it's because we're just that much further removed from the Judeo roots of the Christian faith. Verse 33, and Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread abroad his hands unto Jehovah, and the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain was not poured upon the earth. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain and hail and thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart, he and his servants. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as Jehovah had spoken by Moses. Brother Halverson, our LDS scholar, says the tragedy here is that the plagues could have stopped at 7. They could have changed, and there were still a few crops yet to grow. There was still some time left in the soil that could have brought Egypt back to some kind of sense of security and prosperity. They could have survived all of this. They could have grown back. But no, there would remain 3 plagues more, and these would be total destruction and darkness and death. Pharaoh, you could have avoided it all. You were so close. You said it was enough. You acknowledged your sin. You said you would let the people go, but then you don't. And Papa John has an insight here, and I think we're going to wrap it up with this last insight. It's again interesting to Papa John that the God of Israel is mocking not only Pharaoh, but exposing their false gods as false gods, the Egyptian gods, including their healing gods. There's 3 gods, Sekhmet, Imhotep, and Isis. None of these 3 gods who are considered the healing gods of Egypt. None of these 3 gods could even stop the plagues of the plague of boils. Wow. Again, we certainly do love and serve a great God, don't we? And I hope these stories are reminding us all of the awesome and powerful God we desire to know better. And may each of us learn to trust in his providence and protection in our daily lives. That's part of my constant prayer. And as far as the name of God, let it grow on you. If you can show me differently, I'm open-minded to being wrong. But it just seems at this point in my studies to just land in the most perfect place when you realize how the Father and Son's name complement each other and tie back to each other. So between now and the next episode, ponder and think about these things. Don't forget to serve those around you. Live the gospel the best you know how, just like I'm doing, the best I know how, and love and serve God. And I'll talk to you again soon.